On episode 169 of the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, we speak to organizational change expert Alex Castro, and he's going to tell us how measuring your business will have a direct return on your bottom line. That's right, folks. It's all about the bottom line today. Are you ready for this? All right, let's do it. Welcome one, welcome all to the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, a weekly podcast series dedicated to helping you hit peak performance across the three domains of leadership. Those being leading yourself, leading your team, and leading your organization. This podcast couples my 20 years of military experience as a senior Canadian Army officer with world-class guests to bring you the most complete podcast of leadership going. And for more, feel free to check out our website at movingforwardleadership.com. And with that, let's get to the show. Yes, it is your Chief Leadership Officer, Scott McCarthy, and thanks for tuning in yet again to this episode and podcast. If this is your first time listening, welcome to you as well. It's always great to have new listeners here that are ready to be leaders and not bosses, because that's what we're all about, right? We're all about being leaders across those three domains. And today we're going to be talking about leading your organization, change, and importantly, winning. Because you know what? That's what leaders do. We go out and win. We're going to get competitive. We're going to get a little dirty, gritty here. But the reality is this, folks. If you're not winning, you're losing. If you're losing, your organization is going to falter, your team is going to leave you, and you're going to be stuck as not a leader anymore because, frankly, no one is going to be around to lead. It's not a topic that a lot of leaders and a lot of leadership coaches out there dive into, but I am not scared of it. Why? Because I guess that's my background as a senior Canadian Army officer, right? As I told my trainees when I was a course officer, we're in it to win. No military goes into a war, into a conflict going, winning would be nice, but if we come in second place, it'll be okay. It just doesn't happen. We're in it to win. And as leaders of, especially the business leaders out there, you're in it to win. Now, how you go about winning is what we're here. And that is the difference between a leader and a boss, right? Because a boss winning, that's all that matters to them. They don't care how they go about winning. Leaders, on the other hand, like you and I, care about how our people are and how we actually get to the finish line in first place. And we are not willing to sacrifice our people and our organization's reputation to win. We want to find workarounds, ways to get away from being that boss and still win. And that's why Alex is here on the show. We're going to be talking about measuring, executing, and winning today. Alex is a coach, an executive consultant, and he has developed his own ReM Score. It's a data-driven measurement for determining a company's execution capability or readiness for each strategic initiative it's considering. It's basically a new type of approach that he and his company takes on to help others achieve and win at the things they're going after. He's got a book that is Measure, Execute, and Win, and I've read it. I will tell you, it is a great read. Grab your own copy in the show notes. During this episode, Alex and I talk about how measuring is going to enable you to hit peak performance, how organizations fail at executing their ideas, what alignment is and how to ensure your organization is aligned, and how to analyze your organization and to determine its shortcomings, and so much more. This episode is fantastic, just like all of them, but I really liked how we dove in. There was no punches held in this episode today. Alex is a great speaker. In this episode, though, He did have a bit of a coughing fit, so you're going to hear sometimes him coughing, or there'll be a little bit of a pause here and there. I've done my best to edit it out, but it's sometimes very difficult. Anyway, that's enough for me. It is time to get this show rolling, so don't you sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation about measure, execute, and win with Alex Castro. There we go. Alex, man, welcome to the podcast. So good to have you here tonight.
Thank you. It's completely my pleasure.
So we are predominantly going to be talking about your book, Measure, Execute, Win, which I like the little undertone of winning, because I feel like as leaders and in leadership roles, it's something that doesn't get discussed enough, that winning aspect. But let's just go back to the forefront, the front of that, and measuring. So how does that help leaders out there achieve peak performance? Because that's what they want to do. We want to hit peak performance as leaders, either in ourselves, in our teams, or in our organizations. So how does measuring help us to go and achieve that?
Yeah, you bet. Well, it's I think this might resonate for you, in terms of your background a little bit, in the sense that, as leaders, we're out to drive growth, we're out to drive performance out of teams. But in the mixture of doing that, good leadership positions you to win, right? If you think about your life in general, every leader and mentor and your parents and teachers, coaches, everybody's there positioning you in a way that you can succeed to the best of your abilities, right? And the challenge is you go through this process in growing up in your life and eventually you come out of school at some point, and you go and you get a job, and suddenly you go to work and nobody's positioning you to win anymore, right? And oftentimes you're given objectives, and you're given projects, you're given some kind of a goal that most of the time is unreachable. Most of the time you cannot deliver on that goal. And what that has begun to do is that organizations, there's a lot of movement about purpose and engagement. And those things are very powerful and they're very much needed, but they don't substitute for aligning the ability for your teams to execute on your ideas in a way that allows them to realize the win, even if it's a stretch goal. And suddenly what happens is that leaders start to get frustrated, because it's like, I'm assigning these things out, I can't find the people to deliver them, I can't do what I want to do. And the thing that comes to realization is that as a leader, you have really good ideas. You can see, you're there because you can see the path. You can see the other side of the obstacle and say, look, if we can get there, the opportunity is there for us and we can capitalize on that. The challenge is getting through the process of execution, and how can you optimize that process of execution to getting there. And this is where it all gets really lost. And so unfortunately, 80% of the ideas that we have as leaders and the innovations that we pull from our teams never make it. They never make it to being realized. And that loss in opportunity is so disappointing to watch. I mean, throughout my career, I've seen some unbelievably great ideas, but because, the organization was not aligned to succeed, because obstacles were there that were ignored, biases took over, the idea died. And more importantly, great people would leave the organization because they didn't feel like they were put in a position to win as well. And so it all begins to tie together in how winning affects leadership.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, and I can see how it affects. And it's interesting how you started that off with saying, the world right now isn't focused on winning, and it's just like, I think that's doing us a huge disservice from to as way far back as kids little league, where everyone gets a turn at bat, and everyone gets, there's something to be said for giving everyone an opportunity and a chance, but at the same time there's something to be said for the growth that comes out of being pushed to compete and execute towards that goal, towards whatever it is that you're going after, in direct competition, and sometimes even losing, right?
Right.
And learning from that loss. So it's interesting how you frame that at the beginning. Now, in your book, you talk about, is it the great strategy, bad execution, and you hinted
Mm-hmm.
at it. You hinted at it a few times there in that opening bit. So how does it that organizations out there have these great ideas, but they just flop on executing? And where does it come that all suddenly it's a great idea and they go, yes, let's go and do this, and all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden this great idea just turns into dust?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Really, where it is that the thing that we need to recognize as leaders and within our own businesses is the biases that we have, right? And many times we go through a very lengthy, extensive analysis on the validity of the idea. Is it going to generate the growth we want? Is it going to take us into the markets that we want? Is this opportunity or this product that we're wanting to enhance or release, or this acquisition we want to do, going to make us the company we want to be, right? Take us into the next evolution of who we are. And once that analysis has happened, right, there's this sort of sense of accomplishment, but a little bit of a sense of exhaustion, right? In the sense that there's been this deep analysis into the content of whether or not we should proceed. And then we jump into execution, right? And so what happens there is then there's this whole set of biases that says, look, everything that ranges from the fact to say, hey, look, I've got great hiring practices. I've got great retention practices. We've got a great organization. We run it in these different ways. My people can get us there. From that, all the way over to, we'll just address the problems as they come. And we'll be able to address them because we've got good project management, or we've got good product management, or good leads in the process. And unfortunately, in today's environment, customers, especially with the 2020 crisis, customers have shifted in a way that they no longer tolerate kind of, sort of. You either have to hit it, you have to deliver on it, you have to deliver on it in a way that is fast, that today is typically digital in nature. And if you can't, and if you trip and fall, that was it. That was your opportunity. And there isn't that dusting yourself up and moving on to the next. Really, what we've seen, and I have weekly conversations about this with executives from, 10-person companies to, Fortune 100, that they've gone from a cycle where they've got 18 months to implement a strategy to 4.5 to 5 months. And that compression, that acceleration is not artificial. It's driven by the fact that you and I as consumers, and everybody listening as a consumer, is now expecting that continuous feed of results. And in order to do that, you have to really strip out all of the biases that you have in thinking, oh yeah, we're good. We can do that. We can deliver on that. We can do those things. Because there's so much emphasis on the planning part, the consideration, is this the right idea? Is this the right direction? To then, okay, well, let's just go into execution and we'll just figure it out as we go along. And the challenge is that if you do that, all of these little gaps in alignment between what your idea is and the ability of your business to actually deliver on that idea, the doing part, really start to come out very aggressively and compound on each other. And as a result, we don't get to realize the opportunities that we've spent and invested ourselves into, getting to the finish line, where if we could get them there, they have the potential to do so much for ourselves. And again, I'll reiterate, it's in the last 20 years, I've seen some unbelievably great ideas just peter out, and because they just can't get it through execution. And it's just been a shame. And, the bottom line is that, for most of the listeners, even for yourself in many cases, you're right. Your idea is right. You got it. And all those naysayers out there, you have the opportunity to really put them aside. But you've really got to be able to do some positioning that allows you to be more aligned in the execution, be more truthful with yourself in terms of where you are and your capabilities, so that you can then plan and accelerate that implementation of the idea.
Yeah, I like that. I like all that. And I like the part where you said that, if you don't execute on the delivery of a service or a good, customers aren't going to sit around and wait for you to figure it out, right? They're just going to pick up and move, because guess what? There's 50 competitors today in every little thing. And then there's some other ones that are a little bit nicher than what you are. And you turn around and, everyone's popping up with great ideas and new ways of doing things and all this stuff ready to take you out. So you got to get those things squared away and execute relentlessly, is how I often put it.
Yep.
You've mentioned alignment a number of times throughout this interview already. So I'm interested to get your take on what does that look like, and how do leaders ensure their organization is properly aligned in the first place?
Well, I think that one of the biggest things that we do as leaders is we tend to reflect on what have we recently accomplished, right? And we look at that as a framework sometimes and say, hey, look, we were able to do this thing. We implemented some digital technology, or we able to roll out a new product, or buy a company, or open up into and expand into a new market, and it either went really, really well or had some success. And you're like, okay, yeah, we've got that skill set. It's like, well, since we did it there, we can do it there. And that's the moment where the bias and the dominoes of failure start to begin to tumble. And it's a hard thing to really acknowledge, right? Because you believe so much, not only in yourself and the idea you have, and in the company that you run and the people that you employ, but in the overall opportunity itself. And the biggest challenge that every idea has is getting through execution. And, really for us, it's, we see that, there are steps that need to be taken to really assess, is the capabilities within your business aligned to be able to carry out that specific mission, that specific engagement, right? And you have to take that on a real-time, current basis. You have to take it on a case-by-case scenario, and you need to evaluate as a leader, yeah, that stuff has gone well in the past, but our conditions have changed in the last 3 months. I mean, honestly, for everybody, listening to this, could you have forecast where we all are in this moment today, 18 months ago, right? And people may say, well, this is a unique situation. And, I'll grant that the severity of it is unique, but we were seeing those levels of disruption happen anyways, and they just became more accelerated. And what the 2020 crisis did for everybody is suddenly the veil got ripped off of all of our innovation and all of our efforts. and suddenly people are saying, all right, well, let's engage all this stuff. Let's get it going. Let's kick it into gear, right? We've already been working on it. We're gonna move it forward. And and teams were like, yeah, about that. We're really not as far along as we should be, and we can't get it to go. And suddenly it was like, holy smokes, how are we gonna retrench? And this is happening globally. I mean, this is something that's happening. If you feel like yourself, like you're insulated in some way or exposed, in another way, let's say as a 20-person company, 10-person company, small company, right? And you're saying, I don't have that muscle and that kind of thing. Don't be disillusioned by the fact that you have this sort of insulated opinion around things. When we have conversations with global Fortune 100 leaders, they are scrambling hard right now to stay on, not in front, but on it, right? They are trying to do whatever they can to recover this year. If you talk to a chief financial officer for 2021 strategy, they're all about how are we going to recover revenue? How are we going to minimize and optimize costs associated to operations this year to really realign ourselves in a way, because they've learned the hard way that they cannot, just because I did it yesterday doesn't mean that tomorrow it's going to be the same kind of rodeo. And so for those that want to really begin to drive more growth from their ideas, from their innovations, from their transformations, alignment comes from understanding your capabilities against the idea. And that's a measurement. It's not an opinion. It's something that you need to really, truly be a metric of. It's like, can you imagine banks making loans without a FICO score, and just somebody saying, I think they can repay that. I feel good about that. It's like, yeah, they've been, in the misconception around a credit score in and of itself, it's your payment history. It's like, no, it's not just that. There's multiple metrics that go into your credit score. It's like, how much outstanding debt do you have? What's your payment history? And a few other factors in there, right? And so a business is really no different. And you really need to be able to take a step back and say, where are my biases misguiding me in my decision-making? Or masking issues that I'm going to run into during execution that are going to be very expensive, very time consuming to correct. And how many times am I going to put my teams through this exercise, and how much of my team is going to go away because they're going to start losing faith in me as a leader because I keep putting them in positions where they can't win, right? It all starts to compound. And so that's a lot of what we try to really focus on.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack in there. But I was laughing when you were talking about the pandemic and when it hit, and people were like, well, you can't really plan for the severity. Like, well, how many times have we said that in the past for all kinds of different things? No one planned for the severity of the 2008 crisis.
Right.
No one planned for that. No one planned for the 2000.com bubble burst.
Right.
No one planned for the 1990s tech friggin' revolution. Yeah. Right. So there's a little bit of a common theme here, folks.
Yeah.
Yes, it's going to come and it's going to suck. So you better start planning for the worst so that whatever comes around the corner after we get out of this pandemic and we get into the next new phase and whatever else turns around to bite us, it actually doesn't hurt so much. So right. I love that whole the kind of the theme about what you were talking about there is to get aligned, make sure our practices are in place. And I really like the part where you talked about do an analysis of what are our capabilities and what is it that we expect to be needed and what's that delta. So going down that road, because I'm a super analytical type. Like I will analyze the crap out of anything, and I will look for the metrics and break,
Yep.
big problems into very little problems and grab all the data and look at the numbers myself. And, all of a sudden I'll geek out with some charts and stuff. But for the business owner, business leaders out there, or any organizational leaders out there, where are some key areas that they should be looking at this? Because this day and age, man, we could look at all kinds of crazy types of data, but where should we really be looking at to make sure that, that coverage is actually there, or that it'll help us identify what we're lacking?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. The thing that really has guided a lot of what we do has been the deep investment by some of the largest and most pronounced universities around something that's called behavioral economics. And I was having this conversation with somebody recently where I read HBR, Harvard Business Review, and different articles on a regular basis, right? And to your point, those articles are littered with data and studies, right? And metrics and examples about, hey, look, on a consistent basis, X, percent of this and this and this, and this is what the data is showing. And I was recently reading an article by a guy, and he in his article, he basically started out by saying, I've been saying this for the last 35 years and nobody is listening. And I don't understand why. I don't understand why they're not listening. And it's because a lot of the data, unfortunately, is structured in a way that makes you defensive in how you see yourself. And so as a result, the challenge in communicating a lot of this for us is that, to those that are going through this, you're not wrong. You have the right positioning to do it. The thing that's hard is really taking a step back and re-examining yourself and your abilities to do the work. And that's probably more likely than not what got you into leadership to begin with, is the ability to really say, hey, wait a minute, this formula isn't working, right? And as a result, what happens is that I tend to call good leaders really good wood chippers, right? They have this innate processing capability, and they take in raw content and they process it and produce a consistent output from that content. But the challenge that comes is that sometimes the lack of good raw information, they start to fill in the gaps with bias, with what they think is the right thing. I can't express how many times I've been in a conversation with a really very accomplished individual who says, well, based on my experience. And it's like, okay, but your experience in that situation is X amount of time old. And the world, the ground under you is shifted. And you need to stop looking at the experience and start to look at your capabilities and your ability to process that information. That's where your strength is as a leader. Don't be misguided by the gaps that you're automatically filling in because there isn't enough information for you there to pinpoint it.
It's tough being alone as a leader. You're often in situations where you're not sure where to go. You're not sure what's the best decision. Yet, as Colin Powell once said, it's lonely at the top. And reality is, it takes time. Sure, you can read books and listen to podcasts such as this one, but nothing beats experience. But who has time for experience when you're at a situation right now? that requires experience to lead yourself, your team, your organization through. That's where coaching comes in. You see, coaching enables you to unlock the experience in others. Right here, right now, you have 20 years of military service plus 150 plus episodes of interviews and topics and research sitting at your disposal. So what are you waiting for? Are you ready to level up your game, become that leader that you know you're meant to be? Are you ready to go to the next level? If so, drop me a line, scott@movingforwardleadership.com, or swing by the website and book a discovery call through movingforwardleadership.com/book. And let's get you moving in the right direction, leading better, leading more effectively today, right here, right now. Starting off with leading yourself. And then let's focus on how you can build your high-performing team to drive your organization's output higher, faster, harder today. Not next week, not next month, but today. All right, folks, that's it. Now let's get back to the show. Yeah, I like that, and I hear the theme of the bias coming back out, right? And looking at the data, and often you do find leaders out there who look for the numbers as a form of confirmation bias to confirm
exactly
what they think is right.
Right.
Whereas instead of looking at the numbers to analyze them to determine what's going on and and figure out, okay, what's the best way forward here, and where are my actual holes and gaps, and where do I need, maybe where am I over programmed? Where do I have too much capacity? Because Lord knows, no one wants to put their hand up, say, I got too much people, I got too much time, I got too much money, I got too much whatever, right? I've been a leader of leaders, and it's easy, I can tell right away. And I've also been on the other side of that fence where I'm like, do I really want to raise up my hand and give up this resource because I know, right. But that's where I think you as a leader need to be selling the vision, preaching about, not preaching, but really selling the greater good of the organization. Because if you're a leader of leaders, and when your subordinates, with their, a department head, for example, of a company, if they have access capacity, and meanwhile another department head is struggling, and they know that, they should be putting their hand up to say, hey, I got access capacity right now. Why don't I cut a little bit over to Joe, so Joe can, get his head above water, and we can actually get aligned and execute on this problem that's going on.
Right. I mean, in many ways, it's also, it's, the thing that affects a lot of people is that they get put into positions to deliver on an idea, and it's really the unknowns that tend to derail you. And there's just been this traditional perspective on it that says, I can't see the unknowns. And we kind of disagree a little bit with that, because most of the unknowns that are out there are measurable in many ways.
So one interesting thing is, come to my mind. We're talking about measuring our data and analyzing and stuff like this. But one thing which a lot of leaders can easily find themselves trapped in is that analysis paralysis, where it's like, just give me more, give me more data. Let me measure this, or let's get another metric, or we need more time, et cetera, et cetera. And they just kind of go into this whole cycle and circle. What's your best advice for the leaders out there, for both themselves and their subordinates, to get out of this analysis paralysis and say, okay, it's now time to make a decision?
Yes. Well, the challenge is that sometimes we get so married to the idea We are so committed, which there's another bias called a sunken cost bias, right? We've already invested ourselves so much in this direction that it's impossible to let go, right? And what it comes down to, Scott, in many ways, is that what we all need to adapt to is that we need to be less. We need to begin to let go of this attitude of, well, we'll try this and then fast to fail, or we'll analysis paralysis ourselves into something and the time passes for that window of opportunity, right? We need to start to use data as a way to make more precise decisions as leaders, so that as a result, the things that we engage on, the things we invest in, have a direct return. Because not only are our people positioned optimally to succeed, the idea is really surrounded by truth. Where are we gapping? What do we need to do to fix that? It's that military adage, sometimes you have to go slow to go fast, right? You have to understand capability before you engage action. And that's where the real key is.
Yeah, I love that go slow to go fast. I wrote a post once about weapons training when I was going through my basic level basic level training. And we had a weapons instructor, and he used to always say, "Smooth is fast, smooth is fast."
Yep.
And all he was trying to say is just get our drills down so that we're not stumbling with the rifle in our hand with live rounds, by the way, and and two, trying to change magazines or trying to clear that jam. And he would constantly, one point he'd be yelling at us to targets start shooting, and then next point he'd be yelling at someone because they were fumbling with the mag change. And he'd be there. I could still hear him today, like, smooth is fast, smooth is fast, just yelling at us. But it gets ingrained, and it's true, because you just take your time, you go through it smoothly. And the reality is, you actually go through the drills to the point where you're not actually moving fast, but every little bit is so efficient. All your movements are so efficient. So I spent 2009, from October 2009 to June 2010 in Kandahar, Afghanistan. And I was actually embedded directly into an Afghan National Army unit. And one of my roles was, oddly enough, weapons instructing. So we would actually spend a lot of extra time on the range on top of that. And I'm a lefty. I live in a right-handed world. Being a lefty sucks. Are you left-handed? You're probably not, because you're laughing.
It's funny. I used to be a lefty when I was in grade school, but my teachers forced me to become a right-handed writer.
Right. So I'm lefty. I'm actually semi-ambidextrous. But anyway, for the moral of the story, I'm a lefty. Our weapons, the rifles are made ambidextrous, but our pistols aren't. So for me to use a pistol as a lefty, I need to draw my pistol, switch to my right hand, take the safety off, switch back to my left hand, bring up my sight picture, and then squeeze off around. Way too long. Right. I might as well draw the pistol and throw the dang thing at the guy who's trying to shoot me, because it's just too long. So during that, our time at the range where we're just practicing, I would actually go through weapon switch drills, i.e., I would be shooting with my rifle at the target. I would empty a magazine, basically fling my rifle behind me. As I threw it, I drew my pistol, simultaneously cocked the empty pistol, because I didn't have to worry about the safety anymore, brought it up to a sight picture, and then capped off 2 rounds before my rifle actually hit my back. And that was all about being smooth and efficient. I talk about that often in leadership, that when we rush through our decisions, we're not necessarily being smooth.
Yep.
And that's the same principle. If we're efficient, then we're going to actually get our rounds on target a lot quicker.
Right.
So,
and that efficiency also comes from understanding where you have a gap, right? Because I'm sure that that same scenario, you would have a very different narrative if you were in a jungle versus a desert versus some high altitude snow environment, right? Because there are different conditions that affect different elements, right?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
that's what we look. Yeah, and that's what we look at, right? I mean, the real significant data point that I can share, because I could pull out 20 years worth of data that starts to overwhelm you, and immediately I think that any leader who's listening to this, or even driver of execution who's listening to this, like, yeah, that doesn't apply to us, right? The data that the one point that I want to make is that our customers that use and measure execution readiness tend to see projects go into place 30 to 50% faster. And that's because the thing that happens is that if you do not align that execution out the gate, the problem doesn't go away. You're now having to build and fly the plane at the same time, is the way I like to say it. So as you're in execution of your idea, the product, the acquisition, the new market penetration, the back office optimization, whatever it is that you're doing, right? You're now trying to execute that project plan plus all the corrective projects that you now have to do because you didn't see them. You weren't able to recognize that those issues were there. And as a result, instead of having resources, 100% of resources dedicated to the core effort, you have this splintering that begins to happen, right? And suddenly you go from managing one effort to 2 to 3 to 5 to 7, because you're having to address all these little picadillos that are coming up, right, in terms of what's happening, right? So you may have a manager that does not know how to lead through a transformation effort. You may have an organization that cannot adapt to the change that's being put on them. The vision is not clear enough. The business unit that you need to contribute to this is already at 100% of capacity. So it's things like that that truly begin to crop up. And now you have to figure out how to address those while you're trying to deliver your idea. And that's where it starts to unravel, because the costs go up, the timeline gets longer. Okay, you can look at those metrics. But the air comes out of the sails. The tolerance from customers or management to continue starts to go down. People start to, really minimize and start to kind of crawl away from the effort because they don't want that association, right? And many other things that happen. And as a result, as a leader, now you're managing this chaos, and your project has turned into something that you're striving for opportunity to damage control. You're just trying to get to the other side of whatever this thing is with the least amount of reputational impact. And in the end, that doesn't help your career. It doesn't help your company. It doesn't help move the company forward. And, how many times have people been through an effort and they're like, I never want to do that again? And that's unfortunate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely not peak performance right there. Actually, that's the inverse of it. And that's a nice little neat bow you just threw on this whole conversation. I don't even feel like actually depacking that one. I'm going to leave it be because that was fantastic.
All right, good.
Alex, man, this has been a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but all good things must come to an end, as they say. But before we wrap up, I do got a couple last questions for you.
Yeah, for sure.
One is a question I asked all the guests here at the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast, and that is according to you, Alex Castro. What makes a great leader?
I think it's the ability to leave your ego at the door, to be able to truly understand what you're good at and what you're bad at. I use a term internally with our teams very, very often, and I call it a force multiplier, right? So I say, look, if the CEO of Walmart could do everything that Walmart does today without a single employee, do you actually think they would go out and hire people? And you can meander through that answer, but at the end of the day, the answer is no, right? Why does Walmart have all of these employees? Because they're force multipliers. There are things that I don't do well or I do not have enough time to do. And it's understanding what that multiplier looks like, right? And being able to let the ego down and understand I need to bring in better than me to do this or equal to me to do this and not feel threatened about it. Because at the end of the day, it's the mission, it's the end state that you're really looking to accomplish.
You must be like following me for a while, because I talk about leadership multipliers, which is based off of the military thing that we call force multipliers. So you're literally ripping words out of my mouth here.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of great established concepts that we need to really just, in the end, lean into. Right? Is the fact that
absolutely,
is that we hire people and bring people in to multiply our capabilities moving forward. And that means we need to deeply recognize what can and cannot do. It doesn't diminish you as a leader to sit in a room and say, I don't know the answer to that, but we are going to go find it. That's leadership.
100%.
That is leadership.
100%. Yeah. I say that if you're the smartest person in the room as a leader, you're either in the wrong room or you brought in the wrong people.
Yeah. I mean, I tell my folks, it's like my entire goal within my company is I look forward to the day I walk into a room and I have nothing to contribute. Right? There's no answer I can provide or idea that I can expand on that hasn't been addressed in some way. That is the day that I know that I've actually done my job really well. That is our job as a leader. I mean, imagine being able to put a mechanism in place that can address those things. That to me is that's the tip of the razor for me.
Beautiful. Absolutely love it. Yeah, I often say we're all about questions now, not answers as leaders. That's the goal, right? All right, final question of the podcast. Where can people find you? How can they follow you? Be part of your journey. It's all about you now.
Yeah. The name of the company is M as in Mary Corp, M Corp. The book talks about a platform called ReM Score, REM Score. It means readiness measurement score. You can find the book on Amazon. It was a bestseller for a little while. It's on Audible. If you want to just listen to it, it's quick and dirty, about 2.5 hours long. Check it out, because at the end of the day, whatever you can do to remove those obstacles in execution before you engage, that's the time it costs you the least in terms of schedule, in terms of actual dollars and people and resources. And if you can get that alignment early, you're going to accelerate delivery. You're going to get to market faster. You're going to meet the demand faster. And your employees are going to celebrate that with you because they see that you are able to lead them through this post-crisis environment into the future.
No, that's awesome. Love it. And for listeners out there, as always, it's easy. Just go to the show notes, and that is at movingforwardleadership.com/169. Alex, my man, thanks for coming out. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor, sir, to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's just been great.
And that's a wrap for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the Peak Performance Leadership Podcast. But you know what you could do to truly support the podcast? And no, that's not leaving a rating and review. It's simply helping a friend. And that is helping a friend by sharing this episode with them if you think this would resonate with them and help them elevate their performance level, whether that's within themselves, their teams, or their organization. So do that. Help me, help a friend, win-win all around. And hey, you look like a great friend at the same time. So just hit that little share button on your app, and then feel free to fire this episode to anyone that you feel would benefit from it. Finally, there's always more. There's always more lessons around being the highest performing leader that you can possibly be, whether that's for yourself, your team, or your organization. So why don't you subscribe? Subscribe to the show via movingforwardleadership.com/subscribe. And until next time, lead, don't boss, and thanks for coming out. Take care now.